I'm most attracted to where people put the borders. Where have you chosen to end and begin your photograph? That to me is what separates, anybody that picks up a cell phone and an artist. It's where you put the borders. Define the photograph. That's the essence for me.
Welcome to the show, Steve. It's been a wonderful ride up to Rocky Hill from where I live. Let's talk a little bit about your background in photography and what inspires you about doing film photography for these 35 years you've been doing them.
I have. Thank you. Welcome to Rocky Hill. Welcome to my darkroom.
Absolutely.
I'm honored to have you here.
Yes. Can I make myself at home?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Great.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
The whole the process is what attracts me. I use a larger camera that requires a dark cloth over your head and that kind of thing. So it's a very contemplative type of photography. So I'm drawn to that, and I'm drawn to the actual challenges and the limitations, that camera provides. The limitations of making prints in a wet chemistry. It's kind of cliche, but when the print comes up in developer, it's just it's magic. It still is to anybody. So that's the general thing that attracts me and keeps me going.
So every time a print comes up, it feels like you're back again, but on day number one when you experience it. I've created something, right?
And a lot of people can't understand, especially younger people that have no knowledge of the wet darkroom process. But to see something materialize in essentially clear water, a white piece of paper that had light shined on it, and all of a sudden you get in this image, that's pretty special.
It is, yeah. I got to go tell you a quick story about how I got started in this business, and it was because of that very same experience in a darkroom. I was in Tokyo. I had no way of just, entertaining myself because it was expensive. It's
Sure.
a very expensive country to be in.
Yeah.
So while the rest of the class went off and partied and went clubbing, actually, I found myself hanging out with the other photographers, and I wasn't even a photographer back then. I was just like, hey, well, what do I do? And this one guy said, hey, let me show you what we can do. And he showed me this print come up, and I was like, this is it. I love this.
It's intoxicating.
It is. And I've, since that day, 20 plus years ago, I've been just obsessive about photography as well. And so this is exciting to hear that you've stuck to one medium for all of that time. Have you ever dabbled in digital photography at all?
I mean, this is not my livelihood.
Okay.
So I was never forced to make that transition. Should I transition to? I mean, all of my social friends are former photographers, many out of business. It's just the nature of how the whole thing has evolved. Yeah. So I was never faced with that conundrum, if you will.
Right.
So it was always about the pleasure that I drew from this, and as my knowledge base increased, it didn't make any sense to go in that direction. Having said that, I can tell you now that with these cell phones and how fast you can make an image, I regularly practice the visual skills with a cell phone. I record images many times that I have taken, but many times if conditions aren't right for the camera to come out, or the backpack, the big one, it doesn't mean I'm not going to hold a cell phone up and kind of compose it, and this is what I do, and change this and that. I'm drawn to creating something. This is what I always like to say. When I look at other people's work, to me, it's very easy to see where the center interest is. I'm most attracted to where people put the borders. Where have you chosen to end and begin your photograph? That, to me, is what separates anybody that picks up a cell phone and an artist. It's where you put the borders. Define the photograph. That's the essence for me at this point. Fortunately for me, the whole process it's kind of second nature now, so I'm kind of free from my mind to be creative and to do things a little bit differently, because I just don't worry about the process anymore. I know the limitations, I know what I can do and what I can't do, and I don't go outside of those parameters.
I love what you said about the borders, and I think in some respects, whether you are a digital photographer or a film photographer, you still have to deal with those
Sure.
borders. So I think in some ways there's common ground, clearly, right? That people listening to this conversation will hopefully say, okay, well, it doesn't matter whether you're a digital or film photographer.
Perfect point,
It's-
sure.
You're
a visual artist.
You're a visual artist,
Yes,
period. That's
absolutely.
it. Doesn't matter. Along the way, who has inspired you in this field of film?
You mean
photography?
name-wise?
Name-wise, yeah. This is your opportunity to drop names.
Well, I mean, naturally, if you're an outdoor guy and you're into the landscape, Ansel Adams
Sure.
was first and foremost in everyone's, the forefront of their focus. So, I was drawn to that, and I went out west, for the grand landscape and whatnot. But as I evolved and became, more in tune with what I enjoyed, it clearly shifted towards Edward Weston's type of work.
Okay.
So, those are some big names. The Edward Weston naturally is in the environment type of thing. I'm very drawn to the urban landscape as well, and with that I identify with Berenice Abbott from the 30s and 40s. I love her work. She did a lot of work in New York City. So, those are the influences that I, draw inspiration from.
Anybody still alive that might be somebody that you look up to and say, "Oh, that's amazing work"? I mean, is there a contemporary of yours that does work that you just feel is at a very high level?
In the black and white
Sure, yeah.
genre?
Yeah.
Boy. I mean, I have close friends that I enjoy their work, and I respect their work. It's different than mine. My mentor, Jack Holowitz, is. I still think he's the most creative photographer I've met, and had the pleasure to work alongside of. But somebody that these names are racing through my head.
Yeah. How about a John Sexton?
I mean, I understand. I know the name.
I mean, he studied under Ansel Adams, so I
Right.
think there's some crossover there. But is there? Okay, let me ask you this question: is there a particular thing that you find or you look for in somebody's work that makes you sit up and pay attention to their work? What would that be?
Their use of light.
Their use of light.
Yeah.
Okay.
How they incorporate different lighting textures and influences in their work. That's kind of what gets my attention. So much of my work was always done just before the sun came up, that sweet light period, as Sexton's has been done. But as I've evolved, I'm hoping to incorporate more dramatic lighting into the black and white, work that I do. The way I expose film, and if I can incorporate that into it, it adds a component to it that you couldn't get years ago. Just because of limitations of film and development processes and things like that. So.
Yeah.
In that respect, I do think that I'm doing something that's not done that often.
You are, you've been sort of married to the idea of producing work that's black and white, right? But you've been doing this for 35 years. Now, when you first started out, you certainly had certain developers that you could only work with. And since then, I know, having seen some of your Facebook posts, for instance, I know that you've started working with developers that I don't even remember hearing about. Are those new, or is it your own concoction?
Well, no, my own concoction is the actual process, the way I do it.
Gotcha.
But as far as the developers go, you're referring to a Pyro-based developer.
Right.
Pyro developers were popular back in the turn of the century. When I say the turn of the century, I mean the 19th century.
Oh wow. Okay.
But they fell out of favor because of a number of things. They're a little bit more problematic as far as consistency and things like that. There's kind of some bad it gets a bad rap in that it can be assumed that it's toxic. Anything in this darkroom is toxic if you don't treat it with respect. So, why exactly it fell out of favor, I'm not quite sure, but the pyro that I use, a friend of mine was actually the one that invented the pyro cat that I use. Not to confuse that there's a number of different pyros.
Okay.
I happen to believe that the pyro cat HD, which Sandy King invented, is superior to all other pyro developers, and I can give you a laundry list of why. And I do, in workshops, I give an actual handout that has the pluses and minuses of the different pyros. But aside from that, again, if you put two prints on the wall and one is with PyroCat and one is with PMK or another pyro, I'm not sure you're going to see dramatic difference. But I know the things that PyroCat is better at, and so because of that, I exploit those things. So
is that primarily what you use now?
That's all I use.
Indeed. Okay. So my question back to you as a follow-up is that, over the years, you've sort of gravitated towards one kind of
Absolutely.
developer for your vision. Ultimately, that's
yes.
It's almost like you bought yourself. I mean, not to dumb this down so badly, but some people like a certain camera strap because it fits nicely on their neck.
Sure.
So it's sort of like that, in that it produces the quality of a print that you feel says Steve Sherman, ultimately, right?
Yes, and the process that I use, everything that I do is for one sole purpose, and that is to create greater midtone separation, not contrast. There's a big difference between contrast and separation. I'm interested in creating separation in the midtones of my prints. As far as I'm concerned, you never hear people talking this way, but as far as I'm concerned, in a black and white print, the bottom end and the top end, the darks and the highs, they're nothing more than reference points. They're bookends. What happens in the middle, the soul of the print is in the middle, is in the midtones. So if I've determined or if I've figured out how to exploit those midtones, why am I not going to continue to pursue that? So as I say, I've gotten the process to where I want it, so now it frees me to be creative and think well beyond just the process. So the process is done, as you said with the camera strap. I don't need another camera strap. This works for the way my neck is. Because this process is mechanical and guys are guys. They want to change things. They want to constantly do things different. And that's not me.
Yeah.
I figured this out 15, 18 years ago, and I haven't changed.
Yeah.
The only thing that changes is what I put in front of the camera.
I love that. So what kinds of things fall in front of the camera or you're excited about every day now?
I'll be honest, there's a challenge. I'm a very competitive guy. I used to coach baseball for 20-some years.
Oh, is that right?
I'm stupid competitive. So there's a competition factor in that, if I see something, I understand the limitations of the camera. I'm attracted to that. I want to beat it. And, most times I probably fail, but the times that I do succeed, boy, that's some serious satisfaction. I have good friends that say to me all the time, say, Steve, you're constantly trying to hit a 5-run home run. Guilty.
Yeah. Why? What is it? What inspires that competition within you? Like what started that? I mean, it's got to come from someplace.
I think that probably came when I was a kid.
Yeah.
It's just I got a competitive streak in me. It's who I am.
But so you're overcoming the limitations of a camera or the developer.
That's inspiring.
That gets you excited to
Yes.
do better work next time
Yes.
around, right?
Yes.
So, what would you tell photographers now, with digital cameras? What would they, or what should they do that would probably get them excited about making better photographs tomorrow?
To learn their process as quickly and as best that they possibly can. Don't deviate from it, and then go and make photographs.
Gotcha. Awesome. Excellent. Let's talk a little bit about this idea of craft and technique. I mean, you've talked about technique and mastering it and honing it over the years. So the technique part of it, based on the chemicals and the temperature of the water and all these other things that come into play, are things that are sort of secondhand for you.
Yes.
Right? What challenges you still, though? I mean, is there something that when you are set up to go, you go, oh man, this is one thing that's kicking my butt. Even though you're competitive, I want to know something or the other has to.
You're absolutely right, because there's been times when I've been under that and larger,
Right.
fully having the skills that I have.
Yeah.
And I got Springsteen is blasting on the radio,
Right.
and I'm telling you the truth. This has actually happened. I've turned the radio off. I've come over here and I'll talk to myself. I'll psych myself up like I was on a pitcher's mound. I said, Steve, come on, get on the other side of this thing. Get this thing done. Again, it doesn't always mean that I'm going to be successful, but I think it plays into the fact that I don't give up real easy when I'm in this room.
I love it. We'll be right back after these messages. Thanks, Steve.
That's the buzzword.
Yes. So, okay, we haven't started going, but do you want to talk a little bit about the return to film or the resurgence of film? Do you know a little bit about? Can you sort of address why it's happening, possibly? Do you have an idea or?
Well,
some guesses.
Yeah, I do. I think the digital age has given birth to, exponentially more visual people.
I love it. Hold on, I haven't started recording yet. Let's start this. And we're back. Thanks for joining me back again, Steve. This has been a great conversation about your experiences as a film photographer all of these years.
Right.
And one of the questions that I was really thinking about is I know film is making a comeback in some circles. Not quite like it was back, in the 1970s or 60s or 50s or whatever.
Sure.
But people are somewhat curious about film. I know there are new film stocks out there. Film papers are coming out. Yeah. There's a book that describes how a group of guys restarted a factory that made film in the past, and now it's starting to make film again, and they're looking for people to buy their film. So things are sort of coming back. What would you say to those who are interested in film or curious or excited about the idea of film photography? I think
it has to have started with young people, and it has to have started with the digital age. So I think cell phones and how easy it is for people to become visually aware nowadays, that's given birth to an interest in what used to be. So just by the sheer numbers, there has to be, or there is people that are interested in what is the old process like. And I'm fortunate in that I've gotten to a point where I know some pretty big names in the industry, and they're swinging back to, they see where the film and wet process photography has little nuances that the digital just can't recreate. Now, that's not to say that one isn't better than the other. It's what it is to say is they're different. And as soon as people begin to understand that, then I think both genres of photography can be more embraced. Digital is always going to win out in this fast-paced world that we live in, of course. But as far as crafting something special, there's just nothing like the old tried and true. I mean, you just mentioned that albums are coming back.
Yeah.
There's reasons for that. And
we're talking about vinyls, not wedding albums.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not nostalgic. It's rooted in quality and a different look.
And it's also an opportunity to hold something. Would you agree?
That's very true, and I'm glad you brought that up, because several years ago I had a show in Springfield, Mass, and my mentor was in the show as well, Jack Holowitz, and he was being interviewed by a local news station, and I heard him say something that just stunned me. And when you break it down, it's as succinct as you could possibly be. And Jack was a wedding and portrait photographer for years. Where, back in the day, he had a carriage trade type of clientele, so they would buy big prints and whatnot. So, in this interview, Jack would say he took out his cell phone and he said, he says people nowadays all they want to do is they want to look at pictures on this. And he held up his phone, and I was like, wow, that's just profound. People aren't interested in seeing something on the wall anymore. They want to see it on a phone or some kind of a screen. So, I think that's part of the problem that, this type of photography has kind of fallen by the wayside. It's not conducive to rapid, satisfaction.
Oh, no way is it rapid. I mean, it takes a lot of time. Obviously in the dark, away from a lot of things that sort of pull at us, right? So
just think about it. Somebody's snapping a picture and then they go like this.
Yeah.
Well, that takes me 3 weeks to go like this.
That's exactly right.
It takes them a millisecond.
Right.
Oh, let me do it again. I don't have that option to do it again. So, as far as understanding my process and understanding how to get from A, B to C, there's a lot more knowledge that's packed away than is necessary. Photography is always going to be about light, but people that have a cell phone, they don't understand that. They have a tool to capture something. There's really no awareness of lighting or how light is impacting it, other than they come away with a usable picture. But they call themselves photographers.
All right. We won't get into the politics.
So they
I know what you mean.
No,
I know what you mean.
I'm
Yes.
fine with them being photographers.
Right.
I'm a visual artist now, because of that whole competitive thing. Okay, if you're going to be a photographer, I'm going to be something else.
Gotcha. All right. I mean, I like the idea of sort of presenting yourself and positioning yourself in a different manner from what most of the people out there are calling themselves. That makes complete and total sense. If you don't mind, let's talk about the gear you use. I mean, you're not a photographer. A film photographer is using 35mm cameras. You're using large format and ultra large format cameras, right?
I am, and I started there with 35mm,
Sure.
and it was a natural progression. I went from 35mm to roll film to a 4x5, then I went to 5x7, and I have a 7x17 camera.
Right.
So, as far as the formats, I'm more drawn to a panoramic look. So the 5x7 is more panoramic than 4x5. I don't like the 4x5 format at all. And the 717 is kind of that extreme. So that's what lights my fire. So I don't need any other formats. And it used to be, so the camera the 5x7 camera that I have has a capability of reducing the back to a 4x5, different format. But if the lenses, so let's say I have 4 lenses, if you change the format, now you have 8 lenses. I was never able to process that because it always had to be the maximum amount of square inches of film. A very good friend of mine, he doesn't have the corners of the ground glass cut so that he can see every millimeter.
Is that right?
Yeah, and I mean he's got 2 Guggenheim, so who's to argue with?
There you go. Indeed. Let's talk a little bit about how your vision has evolved over the years. What have you focused on initially, and then what are you focusing on more and more now, and why?
Well, obviously in the beginning it was the landscape. Then in the mid-90s, I began to enjoy looking at urban work, and when I had a couple of really good friends that lived in New Britain, and they were doing urban work quite a bit. So anyway, this good friend of mine, Peter Bosco, we find this defunct factory. It was being torn down at that point in time. We go in there on Labor Day, 1997. And I remember him telling me, he said, because I used to admire their work. And he said something that stuck with me all these years, and I still think of it. He says, Steve, all it's about is filling space. So, with the landscape, you never really had to worry about exactly how you fill space because you have that near and far thing that's already built into the image.
Sure.
When you're photographing something like a building or a an area that's derelict type of, then it becomes much more important what you put in certain parts of the photograph. So that little phrase, Steve, is just about filling space. Okay, I'm done. That's golden. That's with my head wherever I go. So that was a big turning point for me. That one phrase that he passed on to me, and then earlier.
Was he talking about composition?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So, but in continuation, what you said about the borders, what you put in between or inside the box, this idea is that you have to fill the frame.
In that
right?
kind of photography, it's much more critical to fill space because you don't have the benefit of a near and far relationship with the mountains in the background, that kind of thing, or something close. So that's the way I look at it. And the other thing, which is a big part of my process, I was fortunate enough to I was involved in the professional associations for 8 or 10 years. And there was a speaker that was big back in the late 80s and early 90s. His name was Dean Collins.
Oh, yeah.
God rest his soul. Well, he said something that stuck with me, and it's the very first thing that I think of when I'm going to make a photograph. And he said, we photographers are charged with capturing a three-dimensional world and presenting in a two-dimensional medium. So if you think about it, that one phrase plays into exactly where you stand, how you move, what exactly you put in the frame and where you put it in the frame. There's another famous photographer that I love metaphors. Somebody else has done the tough thinking. I can figure a metaphor out. But one fellow said, the best lens you own is your feet.
Yeah.
Okay, never thought of that, but now I understand.
Right.
So it's, when you do something for 35 years, there's not a lot of surprises left. Right. The surprises are, how creative can I be? How can I do something a little bit different?
Give me an example of something you've shot recently that...
Very good example.
Yeah.
Getting back to the 5-run home run, that's always me.
Mm-hmm.
So just last year, I started this thing with a couple of friends called the Photo Arts Exchange, and it's all about displaying visual art. Can be from a cell phone, can be from an ultra-large format camera, can be from a DSLR. It's about displaying visual art. So now, because of that, I charged myself with making a portfolio that had a common theme to it, and that theme happened to be the winter. So I had a number of images, that dealt with ice and whatnot that I already had done. Well, now I'm out just prior to this event happening, and I'm looking to augment that portfolio of work. So I'm down on the riverbanks in Connecticut, and there's these ice flows that are flowing by. So getting back to that thing about the whole process is so second nature to me. I got the camera set up, I'm setting the camera, I'm putting the lens in, I'm screwing but my mind is thinking, all right, now what am I going to do different here? Well, how am I going to make this a little bit different than everything else I've done? And it just popped into my head. It says, for everything that I usually do, where it's so crisp and sharp and this, I said, I'm going to drag the shutter just a little bit, and all these different multicolored, multi-toned ice flows are going to just be blurred just right. And I think I made 4 sheets. In other words, 2 holders. I always shoot 2 sheets of identically, and one of them wasn't anything at all that was impressive, because everything is changing with the way the ice flows are interacting with the trees that are across the river, and how much space there's water and whatnot. Well, there was this one particular image, or negative, that it was perfect. And it really lit up a lot of people in that Photo Arts Exchange. So again, getting back to that whole thing, it was an evolutionary type of thing that I evolved because of that portfolio that I wanted to complete. But it was also based in, I didn't have to guess about, how long is the shutter speed going to be to blur something, how it was.
All that is built in.
Yes. Yes, but it's not built in because I'm anybody special. It's built in because I got a really big wastebasket and I got 35 years under my belt. That's
It's true, right?
it's absolutely
Yeah, you
true.
got to keep trying on it.
It's absolutely true.
It's well, I mean, people talk about practice, right? You go out there and you're making photographs every day, and certain things. This is something I do once in a while. I just want to sort of bring a chuckle to myself. Is like, I walk outside and say, what would the exposure be right now? To something I'm looking at, and invariably I'm right, 3 or 4 times out of 6.
Sure.
And that comes from just being out there and doing
Yeah.
it again and again, and seeing things as you would see them, and making it a habit.
I mean,
So
I've been in those, and the students that come to me, I've been in their place.
Right.
I've been in a place where, okay, I got a checkbook. Just tell me how to do that. I'll give you the money. Well, that's not it. And people that come to the workshops, that's what they want. They want to make that print when they go home. Well, it's just not quite that easy.
yeah,
But if you love the process, as many people say they do, they're willing to do it. But there's not as many of those people as they think there are.
gotcha. Talk about process. I mean, you say something called the power of process components. What is that?
Well, that's what I call the way I do things and why I do things. I have 5 different steps, but every single one of those components is geared towards one thing, and that's creating greater mid-tone separation.
Can you go over those 5 steps?
Sure. The first one is light and composition. So how do I space the spatial relationships that I use? How do I put something here? Why did it go there? That type of thing. There's a perfect example over there. There was 2 of us at that exact location. Same camera, 2 different photographs. I'm very, very pleased with my image, the way it's, has a near and far relationship and that kind of thing. Little tiny slit between the 2 buildings, that's there to create separation. Gives you the idea, oh, there's depth there.
Right.
So, that's the first thing. The second thing is how I expose film. So, the way Ansel Adams did things worked then. Well, materials have changed, and if you want to take full advantage of the way the materials have changed, that's how I expose film. So in other words, what I mean by that is I give a lot of bottom end exposure, give a lot of exposure to the film. So there's a lot of mid-tone information. But then I compress it in the development. So I'm pushing all these tones together, which is exactly opposite of Adams' theory. The reason I do that is because now they have what's called multi-contrast papers. Used to be years ago with Adams, you had different grades of paper so that you could make slight adjustments to what the negative had on it. Well, now you have the paper that can make those not slight but significant adjustments. So what it boils down to is I get more contrast separation by expanding the paper's contrast than I do by expanding the film's contrast. It's no harder than that, but I won't kid you, it's tough for older people. When I say older, I mean people from my generation. It's tough for them to get their head around that.
It's blowing my mind, I'll be honest with you right now, because I spent about 6 or 7 months at the main photo workshops where I learned the basics of black and white photography, from processing to exposing to processing to developing and obviously printing. And I think you're right. I mean, I think they were teaching the old method
Sure.
of doing things, and this new way. So you're leaning more on the print, the paper and the print versus the negative. So the negative can be whatever it can be, but you're focusing more on how to print. I mean, in some respects, a photographer who prints versus a photographer who just exposes negatives, to put it bluntly.
Yeah. I mean, I had a photographer that come here for a workshop, and he looked at my negatives, and he gave me a terrific quote. I never saw it coming. He says, "Your negatives are disturbingly flat." But they're designed that way so that I can expand
Right.
the contrast.
You got more flexibility.
Much more flexibility.
Right.
Peter, I've done examples with some of my videos where I have taken negatives I don't want to get real technical, but years ago you would have an N+2 negative, and you could have an N-2 negative. I've taken those same negatives, designed that way, designed in the Ansel Adams manner, and I've made identical prints, which, to be honest with you, is kind of surprising to even me, that paper has that kind of flexibility to produce those prints. So when you have that kind of flexibility, I'm just exploiting what the
Sure.
process has given me. And then the way I was fortunate enough back in 2003, again, the competitive thing, I read this article by Sandy King, who's, he's a pyro guru. But he mentioned this whole thing about semi-stand and this type of development. He says, when it works, it can be extraordinary. But I'm quoting his article. That's how often I've recited this. But he says, when it works, it's special, but it's fraught with dangers. Well, I said, here's the challenge. Let me get this. Let me see what challenges. Long story short, through trial and error, I perfected a process, and it kind of exploded as far as within the film world. If I was a little smarter marketing person, I'd probably be much more famous than I am now. But I'm not smarter. I immediately call Sandy King and say, hey, what's going on here? I mean, Sandy has freely said, Steve's prints are the finest silver gelatin prints he's ever seen. That's a direct quote from Sandy King. But again, it's another part of the process, and the pyro developer enhances that semi-stand type of film development. I don't want to get into exactly how and why, but it does. The fourth component is a different way of printing. In other words, obviously I'm using the multi-contrast paper, which is affected by different colored light. I only use 2 colors of the light. There's an infinite number of colors of light. I only use the extremes, blue and green. There's technical reasons for that, but it does pay dividends. And the final component is I use this a toning method where I bleach the highlights and then redevelop them, and they're kind of on the warm side. Then when you add selenium to the final process, it cools the cool tones off. So now you have a print, when it's done subtly, like I like to do, you have a print that's, and I'll show you over there, where the highlights are warm, but the midtones and the shadows are cool. Well, the highlights project themselves, and the midtones and the shadows kind of recede. So you're getting this dimensional thing on a photographic print. And when it's done subtly and when it's done right, it's an elusive process. But you'll have seasoned printers that'll look at the print and say, I don't know what's going on here. It's magic.
It's black and white photography, but you in some respects it's got that sensibility of color in a way, right?
Yeah.
Like you can. I mean, you're seeing our eyes all see color, most of us, and when we start to see those distinctions in a print, like you just described, you don't know what to make of it. I mean, I get that. Yeah.
And that naturally attracts more attention.
That's right.
You're going to keep that viewer standing.
Right. Yeah. Well, these things are. I mean, in the long run, I mean, they're sort of subtle things that
Very subtle.
A small minority of visual artists produce, right?
Yeah. As far as my process, like I say, one little thing at a time. It's no big. It's like a staircase. But when you put 12 stairs in a row, well, now you're on the second floor. Whereas opposed to if you just one stair, it's no big deal. I can jump that high. You can't jump to the second floor. So, when I tie all these things together that are designed to create greater mid-tone separation, at the end product is different.
Let me ask you this, Steve. You described a scene where you went out and photographed these ice flows. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Were you seeing the print as you were photographing, or were you seeing only what is in front of you?
I was hoping to see the print.
Gotcha.
I mean, there's still some mystery.
Okay. But there's this thing called pre-visualization. People are like, okay, I know exactly where the blacks are going to be, where the whites are going to be, where the midtones are going to be.
Well,
you doing that in your head?
In that sense, I know where the dark values and the high values are because I have to control them.
Right.
But as far as the relationships of the ice flows and the black water and whatnot, that was pure happenstance.
Gotcha. Okay. Is there? I mean, you've talked so much about film. Is there room for both analog and digital forms in fine art photography? I mean, do you feel like everyone's got the pie is large enough for everybody in a way?
I absolutely do. And it probably goes back to when I began to think of myself more as a visual artist than a photographer.
Yeah.
When you become a visual artist, I think the process is less important than the final product, which is it visually stimulating? Is it visually interesting? And so I think there's definitely room for both genres of photography. It's not anything I think I'd ever attract myself to. Just more based in the expense and the learning curve.
Sure.
Somebody asked me a long time, 10 years ago, somebody asked me, I was giving a program, somebody asked me, do you ever think about, becoming a digital photographer? And somebody chimes up from the audience, he's a gourmet cook, why would he eat a TV dinner? And that would be me getting started in digital.
Gotcha. Okay. This is a good question. I think that a lot of photographers who are visual artists who are serious about their art are sort of juggling. And what would you say to visual artists who seem satisfied looking at their work only on a screen? They don't print. They don't create a book.
I think it again stems from what they've been brought up with. They don't know anything different. They've always seen visual things on some type of a screen.
Right.
So until they expose themselves to handmade prints, I don't think they're going to really enjoy all the possibilities that visual art has. So, in that sense, I think people have to understand that there's something else out there and they should go after it. If for no other reason than to learn about it, expand their own knowledge base, and be able to make informed decisions as to which direction they want to go in.
I mean, don't you feel though it's got to be something that it clearly excites you to make a print. I mean, right? I mean, you're going. I'm gonna hit a 5-run home run. Is that what you said? That's not just making a photo. That's also making a print for you, right?
Yes.
Right.
But here's something that just popped into my head now. It's the mystery of it. I can tell you, I've been out west. I can give you a specific example. I went out west and we went down this backcountry road. It was a home run. Oh, there was just imagery everywhere. The very next day, we camped out that night. The very next day, we went back out that same way. There's a fork in the road. True story. Fork in the road. That way went to what was just a plethora of imagery the day before. I wanted to go the other way. It was the unknown. It was a total bust. We ended up on a highway, on a Interstate 70 in, I don't know, half an hour. It was a total bust. But that's the same way in the darkroom. If I've already made prints and sold prints, sure, I like to sell prints, but it means I have to make that print again. There's no mystery to it. Whereas if I've just developed a negative and I haven't yet printed it, I can't wait. I just can't wait. What can I do with this thing?
In some ways, I feel like there's a way to bottle up that sentiment and distribute it amongst folks. I mean, they might be excited about the picture that they're seeing in the back of their iPhones or their digital cameras, but do you feel that they might be moved to saying, okay, I want something on a piece of paper that I can hold? I mean,
I hope so. But I didn't finish my thought, because what I meant by that was the unknown. It's the unknown. I exposed a piece of film, last Saturday. I didn't get it developed till Wednesday night. I don't get to print it till Saturday. So there's this unknown. There's this anticipation. Whereas if you go like this, and you go like this, okay, that's what it is. I mean, of course, there's digital people that can say, well, I can do this and that with that image that's on that screen, but it's not like the same anticipation.
Right. What on a sort of philosophical level? What's going on with people? Why do you think?
Well,
Forget the fact that it's technology that's driving all of this, but do you feel like people are they bored? Are they just need to be excited and entertained every 2 seconds of their life?
I think
What's
it's what
going on?
the American culture has.
Well, it's not just American though.
Well,
I mean, it's worldwide. I've been to India and I've been to Japan, and everyone's got a device in their hands.
I can tell you a good friend of mine who came here completely he did not know me other than reputation from Scotland. His name's Stuart Walker, terrific guy. He said to me halfway through the workshop, he says, you Yanks are crazy. What he meant by that, he says, everything is 150%, slow down. And I think that the younger people, they're born into that. Everything is breakneck speed. I mean, my work day is, like 8 to 5. My kids go off to college, they're smart, they're this, they're, but their employers are working until 6:30, 7 o'clock at night. My kid gets a cell phone and says, the company's paying for the cell phone. He says, we expect you to answer up until 10 o'clock at night. How much is enough?
Right.
But I'm in here in the dark room 10 o'clock at night. It's just...
Right. But this is not work, is it? Think and make prints and figure out the world, perhaps. I don't know. And there's a story before we started recording that you said that this essentially was central to the building of your home. So
my wife says.
So does your wife. So says your wife. But what do you? So this space right here is the place where you bring people in, you teach, you have workshops here. Talk a little bit about that experience for folks who might be interested in coming to Rocky Hill to learn from you.
Well, that's a great question. I made much of my early work in a very, very small darkroom. No one could join me in there. And as I became a little bit more popular, a little bit more well known, people wanted to take workshops. So it was very difficult to have more than 2 people in that. So I knew I wanted to have a larger space. I was very fortunate in the time frame that we bought this house. It was back in 2006, and digital was blowing up and analog was going down. The pendulum had swung the other way. There were university institutions that were discarding this type of equipment, and I was able to purchase it at a fairly moderate price. Therefore, once I acquired this, the physical equipment, then it began a process of laying out the darkroom. And I worked with the builder. We removed some physical structures so that this room could be, right now the room that you're standing in is about 320 square feet, and then there's a platinum palladium printing room next to it that rounds out the whole space to 440 square feet. So, and this work surface right here is very conducive to, teaching and holding a class and whatnot. I've had 28 people in here.
Oh, wow.
It wasn't a paid workshop. It was weekends that I kind of sponsor. But, 28 people have been in this darkroom, and it's not difficult to work.
When are your next workshops, Steve? What do you got planned?
That's a good question, because I've gone through the whole idea of setting dates and having a workshop of max of 6 people. But I think what I'm trying to convey is it's more focused than some people want to be. And I'm sure people would say it's a little too technical. So what I'm trying to get to is I only do one-on-one workshops, because I find the success rate much, much higher when it's just one-on-one. Now, I would do 2-on-1 if you were to say, my friend Joe, he's very knowledgeable. I would do that as a cost-cutting for you. The other thing that's just happened the past 2 or 3 years is the mentorship programs I use. I use an internet service such as Zoom, and I video conference with these folks. And to be honest with you, it's not as much profit to me, but the retention level, when you spread my process out over 12 months, the retention level is much, much higher.
Awesome. Is there anything else you'd like to tell us about your photography, Steve?
just, if you'd like to reach out to me, critique the interview that you and I had, email me at steve@steve-sherman.com. My website for the workshops is www.powerofprocesstips.com. There's a free blog that you could sign up for. There's any number of ways, if you go on my website, that you could get a hold of me.
This has been an incredible 45 minutes of my life, I think. It brings back memories of being at the main photo workshops, as I mentioned, being back in a darkroom situation, where you're. It's amazing. It really is. It's an experience that I think very few people are ever going to get, unfortunately. But hopefully they will step in, whether it's your darkroom or some other maybe community darkroom,
sure.
and feel the experience of producing, creating work that can hold in their hands. I think more than anything else, that's hopefully my goal as well.
And I'll tell you where they can start for free.
Yeah.
They don't have to do anything. Keep their eye out for Photo Arts Exchange. It's going to happen next year, the third weekend in May in Connecticut. You just come in. You can watch probably 30 to 35 different visual artists of using any type of film camera capture.
Right.
See their visual art and see prints that they can actually hold.
Fantastic. Excellent. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for your time. This has been a real joy.
Okay.
I've enjoyed this.